This announcement today recognizes that Empire actor Jussie Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career. My concern is that hate crimes will now publicly be met with a level of skepticism that previously didn't happen.
How can you doubt that? Like, how do you not believe that? It's the truth. And then it became a thing of like, oh, it's not necessarily that you don't believe that this is the truth. You don't even want to see the truth.
To be quite honest, it's shameful.
An angry Chicago police superintendent today laying out the case that they have against Jussie Smollett, who is now charged with falsifying this alleged hate crime, planning a bogus hate crime, including mailing a letter to himself, as the assistant state attorney laid out in intricate detail. Now, when this first happened, and his explanation for it, everyone seemed to weigh in, including presidential candidates. Cory Booker and Kamala Harris both called it a modern-day lynching in tweets. Just moments ago, Senator Harris released a statement about this after being asked repeatedly on the trail about it. Like most of you, I've seen the reports about Jussie Smollett, and I'm sad, frustrated, and disappointed. When anyone makes false claims to police, it not only diverts resources away from serious investigations, but it makes it more difficult for other victims of crime to come forward. At the same time, we must speak the truth. Hate crimes are on the rise in America. Part of the tragedy of this situation is that it distracts from that truth and has been seized by some who would like to dismiss and downplay the very real problems that we must address. We should not allow that. I will always condemn racism and homophobia. We must always confront hate directly, and we must always seek justice. Kamala Harris there from the trail. Let's bring in our panel. Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon, national security analyst Morgan Ortagus, and Jonathan Swan, national political reporter for Axios. Pretty well worded, Jonathan, in that response, but a sticky issue for these candidates who obviously went down the road when this first came out.
Right. The first statement was, passionate and righteous, and she was asked about it. There was a piece of video where she was asked about it and sort of had this strange moment where she turned to her staff looking quite irritated, and then turned back and clearly thought more about it and put out this statement. There have been other politicians. I think Nancy Pelosi deleted her tweet initially where she condemned this. So there was a whole lot of people who initially condemned this who are now in various ways trying to quietly walk it back.
Morgan, the police superintendent in Chicago, I think a lot of people were riveted by Eddie Johnson. Here's another piece of it.
How can an individual who's been embraced by the city of Chicago turn around and slap everyone in this city in the face? To make things worse, the accusations within this phony attack received national attention for weeks. When you get the opportunity, the shooting victims and families in this city that are victims of those crimes, give them the same amount of attention.
Morgan.
Yeah, I thought the police chief did an excellent job there, but what he did leave out of that press conference was the political element to this, and that's why this has gotten more coverage than all of the tragic murders that the police chief spoke about. And so I did think it was a missed opportunity to talk about that. One thing that we have learned is that Jussie Smollett is a great actor. I've watched him on Empire, but he's a terrible writer. When we see what he staged, not only in this attack, but in the letter, and of course the resources that were diverted. One thing I would say, just going back to Kamala Harris, one thing to remember is there are plenty of people who voted for President Trump in 2016 that also voted for Barack Obama. So I think while it might not help her in a primary, it's important to remember those voters and to keep those voters in the back of her mind, and to remember that those people could still potentially be winnable. And whenever she addresses it fairly and shows that she's not biased to everyone that is supportive of Trump, there may be an opening there.
The president did not stay out of this. Some said they thought he might, but he did not. At Jussie Smollett, what about MAGA and the tens of millions of people you insulted with your racist and dangerous comments? Hashtag Make America Great Again. Notably, he didn't tweet about the Coast Guard officer who was arrested by the FBI and his background of planning white nationalist killings. But your thoughts in the big picture here, Matthew, as we look at kind of where we are in this culture moment?
We're nowhere good. Look, the same people who rushed to embrace Smollett's faux story were the people who rushed to criticize the Covington Catholic boys when that snippet of viral video came out from the pro-life movement march in D.C. And what is the connective tissue, right? It's a willingness to believe the worst of Donald Trump and his supporters. And that's why people rushed to back Smollett. That's why they rushed to condemn the Covington Catholic boys. And now Republicans sometimes are always eager to embrace the worst critiques of Democrats, but we see time and time again that the mainstream media amplifies the liberal critique of Republicans to a far greater extent than it does the conservative critique of Democrats. And this willingness to believe narratives, no matter their truth, is very dangerous to democracy, which depends, Brett, as we know, on evidence and patience.
You've seen the president and how he deals with Twitter, and obviously he saw this moment as a political, like, hey, this is the point. My supporters are getting blamed for everything.
To his defense, it wasn't Trump who inserted himself in this moment. It was Jussie Smollett.
Exactly.
He's the one who said that the people are walking around Chicago saying this is MAGA country, lynching people, etc. So, this was not something that Trump inserted himself in. He was explicitly inserted in the story by the hoaxer. So I will give Trump some defense there.
There you go.
This morning, Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson, you just saw him. He also, he said the entire debacle hurt the city of Chicago and said even more. Watch this.
Smollett attempted to gain attention by sending a false letter that relied on racial, homophobic, and political language. When that didn't work, Smollett paid $3,500 to stage this attack and drag Chicago's reputation through the mud in the process. And why? This stunt was orchestrated by Smollett because he was dissatisfied with his salary. So he concocted a story about being attacked.
Oh, mercy. He may now have no salary. Of course, he's potentially hurt a lot more than people just in Chicago. His friends, his family, his fans, and the millions of Trump supporters who were unfairly blamed here. So why, beyond money, would somebody do something like this, risking so much? Joining me now, it is Dr. Drew Midday, live co-host. He's an internist and an addictionologist, Dr. Drew Pinsky. I'm so glad to talk to you because you are one of the very best people I know at figuring out the psychology behind acts like this that oftentimes go hand in hand with people who are in the limelight.
That is true, and I hate to open with this, but I cannot make much sense of this either, Kennedy. I've got some theories, and interestingly, this entire circumstance has been about human motivation, right? When we first heard about these two assailants in the middle of the night, what would motivate somebody to track down some dude that was 4 hours late, getting a sandwich at minus 5 degree weather in the middle of the night in Chicago? There's no motivation on earth to make somebody do that. So the whole thing didn't make any sense. Here we are again. It's not making much sense. Why would this kid do this? One, the police is building the case that it is for his salary, but that doesn't make much sense either, does it? I mean,
unless he directly sent text messages to these guys saying, I'm sick of the man screwing me, I don't make enough money.
It could be, and it could be part of it, but if you read his Twitter feed, I mean, his vitriol is extraordinary. So you have to wonder if the cigar is just a good smoke, in a sense that he just wants to disrupt, be politically disruptive. That's still a possibility here.
I agree, and he doesn't know exactly how to go about it.
Yeah.
But he sees something, and in his mind, and I guess this is where the disconnect is, because in his mind, it's a logical bridge going from the hatred he has for the president to this act, and it magically unfolds to his advantage,
right.
to the president's detriment.
Exactly, and be that, I spoke to some law enforcement on my radio program this afternoon where they said essentially that may be his motivation, but every criminal believes they're justified in what they're doing. That's part of the criminal thinking. And so you got to wonder, what's interesting to me with the case presently is what's not happening. You don't see him going to a psychiatric hospital or a rehab.
Well, that's my question. Is that the next step for someone like this?
I think they would have already done that.
Because Anthony Weiner did that. I mean, we see this time and time again for Tiger Woods, people who partake in self-destructive acts that don't necessarily have to do with substance.
They have to meet criteria. These facilities their licensing depends on having admission criteria. And if he really doesn't meet criteria for a treatable acute psychiatric condition, there's no way they can admit him anywhere. If he has some sort of chronic character pathology, you and I kind of talked a little bit about that off the air, that's not something amenable to an acute psychiatric sort of hospitalization. That is a chronic condition. You can minimize some of the manifestations, but it doesn't ever really change unless that person very much wants it changed.
All right, but someone like that, I mean, doesn't he see the fallout if this whole thing falls apart?
Yeah.
Or is he incapable? So someone who's so caught up in a fantasy and placing themselves as the victim who ultimately becomes the hero, are they not able to see the flip side?
Let's say he has a character illness, like a character pathology. Literally a feature of that pathology is it's never me. It's always out there. That's the problem. And this could still be part of that. I mean, I'm kind of...
What is that called?
That's called character illness. That's called personality disorder. And it could be sociopathy, narcissism, borderline. These disorders all have those same kinds of features. And they will do very destructive acts, very manipulative acts, anyone with those conditions. And I feel bad for him. Weirdly, because I'm a clinician, when people have sort of, whether it's a personality problem or major psychiatric pathology, I feel bad for that person.
Yeah, because you see this and you see the manifestation, you say, something is wrong.
Something is wrong.
Something has happened in his life. There's some element of pain or trauma, and that's what you are drawn to treat. Where the rest of us look at this and say, wow, what a jerk. He makes a whole group of people look bad, and he doesn't seem to mind that. And then if you voiced any skepticism in the beginning, you were a horrible person.
Right. And to me, when I get angry at somebody, I get angry with journalism. Journalism is supposed to report the facts, not a narrative they want to shove up our what. I mean, they are supposed to report the facts, and if there is a narrative, question it, talk about how it didn't make sense, but we're looking into it, instead of breathlessly running to conclude that narrative in every story they tell. The politicians, I expect that from them. But the journalists, they should have a Manhattan Project to look at how this is possible.
Yes.
A profession that's supposed, if my profession or a legal profession made a gaffe like this, we would take it very seriously. They seem nonplussed.
No, the only people who treated it the way you said was appropriate was the Chicago PD.
Yep.
And they've had a long history of claims of racism. So I think that they are upset, they are disappointed, but somewhat relieved that their investigatory work is bearing fruit.
And the facts are the facts.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all they can rely on.
He and his legal team don't seem to
want to be interested. They don't
No.
embrace the facts. They don't embrace the facts.
No.
But we'll see. I suspect there will be a plea bargain of some type, and you may see some sort of move towards psychiatric hospitalization, some sort of
Well, if he
vague
plays
thing.
it right, and we're going to talk about the pitfalls of fame with the panel tonight, but if he plays it right, man, he could have a book deal and...
Well, he could. That's absolutely true. That's the way media works today. His name is out there. Somebody's going to hire him to do something.
Every top story is about him, and you are an amazing beacon of light and hope. Dr. Drew Pinsky.
Thank you, Kennedy.
Thank you.